Hello, everybody. My name is Robby, and I have the privilege of sharing with you all today about something that has made a huge and positive difference in my life. For those of you who do not know me, I've been coming to ReGroup for the last 4 years. I have been married to my wife for eight years, and we have a 1-year-old daughter together. In my limited free time, you will find me hanging out with family and friends, volunteering at my church, and playing computer and board games. My recovery is a very important part of my life, and I have been in some form or other of recovery for the last 13 years. I don't know about you, but I find it much easier to talk about something which I have a passion for and an interest in. And so I'm happy to be able to share with you today about the 12 steps of recovery. In my life, working the 12 steps has been one of the greatest character building and lifestyle correcting experiences that I have ever gone through. My goal with this talk is to highlight the first 3 steps of the 12-step process and provide you with some insights, my insights and thoughts related to working each of these steps and things to be aware of. Ultimately, my goal is to encourage you to work the 12 steps and to experience this same life change that I have. Before I get started, I have to acknowledge that this talk and many of the things that I've learned were heavily adapted from a talk first given by a man named John Driediger. John and his wife Linda were the founders of a recovery meeting in Abbotsford by the name of Addiction Recovery Ministry, or ARM for short. And I joined ARM in 2011, and it is still meeting to this day, that meeting. So John started ARM as a retirement project after a career as a missionary. They worked in Serbia as well as traveling South and Central America, showing the Jesus film. John's early life up until his mid-30s was dominated by alcohol, and until he attended a local AA meeting and soon after committed his life to Christ. John found serenity through working the 12 steps, and his entire perspective on life changed forever after that. And John was a faithful servant leader at ARM and sponsored countless men through this 12-step process and program until he died from cancer about eight years ago. John was a supporter, mentor, and friend to me, and so it's a privilege to continue his legacy in some small way today. Let me pray before we jump into today's talk. So, Heavenly Father, thank you for this opportunity. Thank you for the 12 steps and for the power that is within them. Thank you that you give us strength to go through a long process like this. And I pray that you would just give wisdom to me and the things that I communicate. And would you be working in all of our hearts and lives, helping each of us to identify you as our higher power and to just lean into the support that you can give us through this process, Lord. So, would you be with us in our recovery, we pray. In Jesus' name, amen. So a little bit of history about what the 12 steps are for those who may be unfamiliar and how they also have kind of changed over time. So for those of you who may not be aware, what we now refer to as the 12-step program was originally created by members of a group that later became known as Alcoholics Anonymous, or AA for short. After the co-founder of this group, AA, Bill Wilson, after he penned the 12 steps, they became universally accepted as an effective way to treat alcoholism. And eventually it was discovered that these same 12 steps were an effective way to treat other addictions as well. And this has led to the 12-step program being adapted to support those recovering from drug addiction, gambling, sexual addiction, and many other addictions as well. So the 12 steps were created to provide structure and direction for AA meeting attendees to work on when they were between meetings. So things for them to do and activities that would help them in their recovery. The 12 steps promote change by giving us tasks that can be accomplished and by reminding us that we must do something before we can expect to see any change in our lives. And while ReGroup is not an AANASA meeting specifically, we do provide a similar supportive environment with a shared understanding that left to our own devices, we are powerless over our habitual sins of choice. Dave Currie, the leader and founder here, has talked many times about how we each need to be working on our recovery outside of the weekly meetings. And the 12 steps are, in my opinion, the best way to do this. So here at ReGroup, Dave has chosen to use the Steps to Freedom workbook and 2 other accompanying books that were all created by a guy called Doug Weiss. So the Steps to Freedom workbook uses the same 12 steps created originally by the AA founders, but it expands on each of the steps by asking a bunch of specific questions that are meant to generate introspection and help us to think through our answers to them and kind of learn from that. So there are actually many different 12-step workbooks out there, which have been created by many different individuals and organizations in the recovery world, and all of them have their own kind of pros and cons. It is ideal here at ReGroup if we all use the same workbook, because if we do, then we can kind of help each other go through that process, and we kind of create a familiarity based on using the kind of shared language that is in this book. At other groups that I've attended in the past, like the ARM group that I mentioned, we use a different workbook called the Life Recovery Workbook by Stephen Arterburn. So it's not so much important which book you use, but again, at this group here, it's important to work the steps, and we find that the Steps to Freedom workbook works really well. One final encouragement before we jump into these 3 steps is to consider how we will create an environment around ourselves that sets us up to succeed in doing the 12 steps. Jumping ahead, step 5 states that we admitted to God, to ourselves, and to another human being the exact nature of our wrongs. So if we think of how we would accomplish that, God is willing to be our constant companion throughout this journey, and we're stuck living with ourselves, so we're kind of confessing to ourselves, but we're still missing another human being to confess to. To further kind of, I guess, drive home this point, did you know that the word I does not actually appear at any point in any of the 12 steps? And this is intentional, as recovery requires working together, both with larger groups as well as more intimate one-to-one working relationships in order to be truly successful. In my opinion, the 12-step process is most impactful if another person witnesses each step of the process and can guide, encourage, and correct us along the way. Also, the likelihood of us completing the 12-step journey is far higher if we have someone to be accountable to who we know is waiting to hear about our most recent progress rather than trying to do it all on our own. In my practice, when I'm doing the 12 steps, I ask a man who I look up to and want to emulate more to be my what's called sponsor or mentor. And I ask that person to be willing to meet with me 12 times over the course of a year or so in order to present the highlights of each of the steps, my learning on them, and report those to him on a monthly basis. So I'll be touching more on the importance of a sponsor or mentor again in the future, but I wanted to just stress the importance of sponsors and mentors at the outset, as it provides so many benefits to us and blessings. So what does each step do? So each of these 12 steps has a purpose, and they are all listed in the order in which they must be completed. So 1 through 12, going up one at a time. The order is significant, and each step has requirements attached to it, which we need to embody or complete before we move on to the next one. Like I mentioned, my previous mentor, John Driediger, he also actually developed or attached biblical comparisons to each of the steps, which I find very helpful because it provides a biblical anchor for each step, and it tells us, why we kind of complete them. So I'll be sharing each of these biblical comparisons as we go along, and I hope you find them informative. What are the different sections of the 12 steps? I find the 12-step process can be broken down into 3 subsections, which are each categorized by a different theme. The first section is what I'll be focusing on today, which is steps 1 to 3, just those 3 steps. The second section is steps 4 to 9, and the final section is steps 10 to 12. I find that the imagery of building a house is kind of the most relatable way of imagining these 3 sections, so I'll try and describe those as well as we go here. So steps 1 to 3, what we're talking about today, are what I consider to be the foundation of the 12-step process. Each later step is based on the perspectives, belief, and choices that are made up in this first section. This naturally makes the first section essential, as other steps will often fail or succeed based on how well we grasp the concepts included in these first 3 steps. Just as a strong foundation is required in order for a building to withstand the test of time and weather-related experiences, these first 3 steps are crucial to the stability and strength of our recovery journey going forward. So looking ahead then just to steps 4 to 9, these are what I consider to be the framing and finishing part of the 12-step process. So this process takes up exactly half of the full 12-step process, and so a lot occurs in these 6 steps, as you can imagine. The steps in this section will guide us to purify ourselves of past sin, and will also establish new routines and practices that will be critical to establishing a new way of life. And then finally, steps 10 to 12 are what I consider to be the maintenance and upkeep part of the 12-step process. These 3 steps seek to create healthy habits and rituals which will keep us healthy in a healthy place in our recovery. Continuing with or building our building metaphor, these steps ensure that the building of our lives does not suffer any leaks, fires, cave-ins, and any other kind of issues that might occur to a building. And it just ensures that the building remains in good condition for the rest of our lives. So it's really all about that maintenance aspect. So now that we've talked about the 12 steps from a bird's eye view, let's dive into the first 3 steps one by one. So step 1 says we admitted that we were powerless over our addictions and compulsive behaviors, that our lives had become unmanageable. The companion Bible verse that goes with that is, I know that nothing good lives in me, that is in my sinful nature, for I have the desire to do what is good, but I cannot carry it out. Romans 7:18. So think for a minute about the series of events that led you to start in recovery. For many of us, there was a flashpoint event where we were caught or we experienced some form of deep conviction, and we became suddenly aware of just how deep a hole we found ourselves in. For some of us, this event occurred years or even decades ago, but for others, this took place just in the last few months. Regardless of when it was that we came to realize that we had a problem, likely all of us remember what that felt like. We likely will never forget the moment that we were caught having an affair, using pornography, or in some other way living a twisted secret life, which was all of a sudden revealed to another human being. In spite of the tremendous pain that moments like this cause when we are found out, most of us actually need an event like this to occur in order to have any hope of recovery. As long as we were secure in our secret lives, living a double life, it was almost impossible for us to find the motivation to create a change and realize that our lives had become unmanageable. However, once we were found out, the guilt and shame of our being discovered acts like a wave, if you will, in the ocean. And if we catch that wave on a surfboard or something, we can actually like ride the motivation that that provides us, at least to a certain extent, and that helps us to make a change. This motivation, however, is time limited, and so we need to use it wisely and act quickly to allow God to make sweeping changes in our life and also to develop new motivations that will carry us forward through the later stages of recovery. So, step 1 introduces us to self awareness, honesty, and humility. We have to admit that we have a problem, a very, very serious problem, a huge problem that we are powerless to fix on our own. We have to admit that we need help. It is also a preparation for inviting spiritual healing into our lives. Admitting our powerlessness deflates our ego and it tills the hard soil of pride, which allows us to be capable of growing new spiritual fruit in the future. If you think of a garden and the soil of our lives was very hard and would not kind of budge and nothing could grow in it. This is something that really churns up that earth and allows us to again be profitable and fruitful in the future. And this process can be understandably frightening and uncomfortable for us, but it's essential for our future health and well-being. We must adopt the idea that we are powerless over our sin in this particular area, whether that's lust or whether that's pornography or masturbation or flirting with women, whatever it is, we have to admit that we are actually powerless in that area. Our sinful pride will rebel against this concept as we like the idea that we are in control and that we can stop anytime we want to. Years of evidence, however, points to the opposite. And so we have to intentionally add the title of powerless over lust to my life resume if we are going to progress in recovery. At times, unfortunately, well-meaning believers will disagree with the concept of being powerless and will argue that God has ultimate power and therefore he can make changes in our lives whenever he wants. And this is true, but our wise Heavenly Father knows that the best way for us to grow in our character and in our trust and relationship with him is to identify as being powerless and to seek his strength to resist temptations that are too strong for us alone. So we're going to talk more about this in step 2 as well. In my opinion, someone coming into recovery should ideally start their 12-step journey no more than a month or 2 after starting. The reason I say this is that step 1 and every step after it requires us to be broken in a way, enough emotionally, enough to be willing to do whatever it takes to change. The longer the amount of time I find in between us having our worlds rocked, this event that kind of comes out, the longer time between that happening and then us starting the 12-step process, the more likely we are to listen to the lie that the enemy tells us, which is that we aren't actually powerless, that we do have power and that we somehow can control this. Again, if you have not completed the 12-step process before and you've been around for a while, please don't feel condemnation here. That's not the purpose of it. I'm just sharing my experience, which is that the 12 steps will I guess, be easiest to get started with if we kind of get into it right away. The longer the kind of period between kind of getting into recovery and then doing the 12 steps is, the more it will feel like an inconvenience and a grind. And so if we can kind of get into it fresh when we're really motivated, it's just easier to do it that way. But know that the experience of the 12 steps will be just as powerful later, regardless of when it is that you're starting, however long a time it's been. The most important thing is just to do the 12 steps and to do the work, so that you will reap the rewards after that. So again, just kind of summarizing a few thoughts before we leave step one here. It's really important to be broken on some level when we're coming into step one. We have to. God is looking for us to be teachable, to be humble, to be essentially willing to just expose all of our life to Him and just say, "Hey, God, like I've messed up here. I need you to take the wheel." And if we don't view ourselves as powerless, while it may sound harsh, I really think that doing the 12 steps is actually a complete waste of time, because the whole process beyond step one is predicated on the idea that I'm powerless, and so I need God to help me in this process to do this work and to change in my life. So I would encourage, and previously the mentor that I mentioned earlier, John, having a recovery meeting, he would, welcome people at the door, but there were people over time who came and it was painfully obvious that they were not ready for recovery yet. They were not feeling that they had that they were powerless. They thought they still had power. And so we lovingly said, great, like essentially let us know when you're ready to come back, when you're ready to do this process. And while that can seem harsh, perhaps, like it really acknowledges the fact that you can't progress further in recovery without this kind of baseline concept that we are powerless and we need God to help us. In spite of that, however, it was always a welcome door. And it's like, we hope to see you next week, like come back next week kind of a thing. So, but my hope here is that everyone here will realize powerless, that we are all powerless over certain areas of and aspects of sin in our lives. And we, again, need God to empower us. So just one final thought, and I'll have these for all three of the steps, but something that I guess you could say would take us out again, if you kind of understand that imagery of like going out and relapsing. So something that will take us out again on step one is just simply believing that we don't have a problem and that we are not powerless. So that's a dangerous, I guess, mindset and view that again will sabotage our future recovery. So let's move on to step two then. So step two says, we came to believe that a power greater than ourselves could restore us to sanity. And the companion kind of Bible verse that goes with that is, for it is God who is at work in you to will and to act according to his good purpose. Philippians 2:13. So what should we do if we are powerless over a life-threatening disorder? The answer to this is step two. Coming hot on the heels of step one, step two brings us hope in the midst of our despair and brokenness. Yes, we are powerless to resist our addictions on our own, but there is a power greater than ourselves that is far stronger than our addiction. When we complete step two, we acknowledge that something greater than ourselves can give us strength and heal us through the journey of recovery. However, it is important to note here that we do not have to be fully convinced of this fact at this point, but we do need to be at least open-minded to the idea, again, that there is a higher power and that higher power, Jesus Christ, can help us and can save us. So thinking of the statement earlier, I talked about sanity and insanity. So what is insanity? This step tells us that in our addiction, our lives were in a place of insanity, but our higher power, Jesus Christ, can restore us from that. We therefore need to fully accept the insanity that our lives are apart from God, God's restoration power. Insanity has been defined in the Oxford Dictionary as extreme foolishness or irrationality. Thinking back to my past in my addiction, my behaviors, lifestyle, and routines could easily be considered as insanity. There was extreme foolishness and there was irrationality. I lived an out-of-control life using porn and masturbation to self-medicate my feelings of insecurity, loneliness, and depression, all the while believing that I had the power to stop when I wanted to. I also had to lie to everyone around me and create excuses for my reclusive and emotionally unavailable lifestyle. These lies ate away at my soul, and over time it became easier and easier. It became easier to lie or to avoid answering certain questions than it was to be honest with people. And I was so oblivious to the damage that my addiction was doing to my soul as well, as well as what it was costing me socially, emotionally, and relationally. So then what is sanity? If we know what insanity is, what is sanity? Oxford would suggest to us that sanity is the ability to think and to behave in a normal and rational manner and to experience sound mental health. Sanity is where we are aiming to arrive at, but we will need God's power in order to achieve and stay in a lifestyle of sanity. A similar side effect of sanity is serenity, which has been defined as the state of being calm, peaceful, and untroubled. Serenity allows me to rest and no longer live a double life, covering up lies with new lies and feeling deep shame at all times. Sanity and serenity are two things that I know that I want a whole lot more of in my life. And in these states of being, we have the capacity to think of others and to act with maturity and wisdom. And this is exactly what step two can provide for us. So step two requires us to be brave and to grasp on to the only thing that may be left available to us. Our sin and the process of going through step one has cleared out all the things in life which we might have been tempted to put our trust in. Our significant other, our family, our friends, maybe even coworkers, all these people may be left in a limbo state at this point, as the truth of our actions has come out and we are left with the repercussions associated with them. In the wake of all this potential loss, who else do we really have to trust in? God may be the only person or being left in our lives who is not in the process of reevaluating their relationship with us in light of new information that's come up. So whether you know God or not at this point, we must choose to believe that there is a greater, higher power than ourselves that can get us through this time. And my encouragement would be to put your trust in this truth and pursue seeking that power out, and He will not withhold Himself from you. And again, here at ReGroup, we identify that higher power as God and Jesus Christ. So thinking of step two and finalizing this step, something that will take us out again, something that is a dangerous, I guess, idea to have in our minds is simply believing that there is no hope of being free from our addiction. If we have a sense of despair that in spite of maybe the people around us that are trying to support us in recovery, and despite of other things that are actually changes that are being made in our lives, this belief that there is no hope, that is a dangerous belief to be holding, because it will undermine the efforts that you are putting into recovery, and it undermines God too, because He actually does have the power to get you through this, but we have to be sticking around through the process long enough to let Him do His work. So we need to continue to stick around. So then moving on finally to step number three, which says, we made a decision to turn our lives and our wills over to the care of God. And the companion Bible verse that goes with that says, therefore I urge you, brothers, in view of God's mercy, to offer your bodies as living sacrifices, holy and pleasing to God. This is your spiritual act of worship, Romans 12:1. So where step two was somewhat theoretical, step three leads us to put our words into action and to make a commitment to giving our decision-making abilities to God. And there are two specific ways that we do this, and we will explore each of these ways separately later. It's important to realize that healing only comes from surrendering to our higher power, Jesus Christ. Our ego and our pride hate surrendering, as we have lived largely self-determined lives up until now. However, our ego and pride have led us into the situation that we are currently actually in, and so as much as we are turning to God, we are actually also turning away from our old ego and pride and the behaviors associated with them. Our old framework for decision-making led us to self-medicate in the form of lust, masturbation, womanizing, or affairs, and so we cannot expect to live differently if the same person is still in charge of our decisions. So if I'm the one making these decisions and I'm the one that inevitably leads to these behaviors, it can't be me making the decisions anymore if we're going to see some life change in me. So step three is crucial, as we need to turn our lives, firstly our lives, which means our life direction, our soul, our spirit. We need to turn all of that towards God in such a way that we choose to pursue His way of living and know in our hearts that salvation and eternity are freely available to us. This is our, what I would call like a North Star decision, as like a guiding light, as we choose which way our ship of life will take us. If you have never committed your life to Christ, please speak with someone you know who has done so, and they can walk you through this process. I'll just give you a hint that it's very easy to do. It takes almost no time and only a few words. So please do that, and there are people around who can help in that regard. In some cases, for the rest of us, we may have made a decision to follow Jesus earlier in life. And if we have done so, then that is excellent. That's a good thing. However, it may actually be significant and meaningful to rededicate our lives to God at this time as a symbol of our change of lifestyle. Please note, this rededication is not for the purpose of salvation in any way. We know that even in the midst of our darkest days of addiction, if we knew Jesus at that time and had already accepted his grace, we did not lose our salvation at any point in that process. This rededication idea is simply a way of creating an altar moment for our lives. In the Bible, patriarchs use these things called altars, where they would build an altar, a pile of rocks, and they would maybe offer a sacrifice. And this would signify or be a significant moment in their life to indicate a turning point or to represent a covenant moment. So too can we signify a new special season of life with a statement of our renewed faith and trust in God and his promises. In some ways, turning our lives over to God is actually the easy part, and that's the first part of this step 3. However, turning our will over to him is a far more complex beast to tame. Surrendering our will requires a second-by-second surrender to God and repenting of what I call micro sins and deviances that we will continue to suffer from until the day we die, unfortunately. The great news is that none of these micro sins, or essentially choosing to, again, take back our will and make our own decisions, none of these are enough to change the course of our lives, at least without a conscious decision to do so. We can rest in the knowledge that we are saved and secured, but we need to daily surrender our wills back to God when we inevitably act selfishly and from our own wisdom and decision-making properties. I heard a great image of how this, turning our wills over to God works when I was in early recovery. Imagine that the decisions you make are all made from a throne, so a big fancy chair. All of our lives, we have sat on that throne and we have made our decisions based on what feels good to us in the moment. However, when we choose to surrender, we are actually choosing to get off of that throne and asking Jesus to take the seat instead while we kneel beside the throne. The challenge then is to not kick Jesus off the throne and decide that we need to be in control again on a moment-by-moment kind of basis. I find this to be the hardest part of recovery, honestly, because I find the longer that I'm in recovery, the more I'm tempted to think that I have it figured out and that I don't need Jesus to be on the throne anymore. It is far too easy for me to get into a frenetic process of playing musical chairs, if you will, with Jesus instead of letting him occupy the seat permanently. It's kind of this image of like, and I feel like this sometimes where I pray in the morning and I ask Jesus to take the throne of my life. And then I get up and I go and talk to my wife and I'm instantly making my kind of decisions. I'm not actually asking God to or letting Jesus, speak to my wife the way I want to. And so throughout the day, I'm kind of doing this back and forth, like, oh, Jesus, you get on the throne. And then I'm instantly kind of pushing him off to the side and saying, no, I'll take this and then I'll let you back later kind of a thing, right? And it's just the image of it is pretty preposterous, and but it's kind of how it works when you kind of think about it. So I find that imagery kind of helpful. And my goal is to, again, let Jesus stay on the throne permanently and for me not to keep pushing him off. So in other ways, step 3, in another metaphor sense, is like putting ourselves in the hands of a surgeon. Once we have discovered that we have a life-threatening tumor inside of us, we cannot save ourselves as we do not have the knowledge or ability to complete the surgical process necessary, but he can. While we may be fearful of what could happen, our only chance of long-term survival lies on the other side of this procedure. We need to stay on the operating table and resist the urge to run from the room. Just a quick note here, this step 3 can be taken even if we still have some doubts. No one is entirely convinced that this will work the first time, that being recovery. We're not always convinced that this recovery process is going to work the first time we take this step. But later, as we get further in recovery, we'll see the results of this step, and it'll be easier to keep making this decision to turn our wills over to God. So again, a final thought of something to be aware of or to be wary of, something that will take us out again, is really just this idea of not committing our life to God and not being willing to turn our will over to him moment by moment. So if we continue to kind of make those decisions and not let God make them, that's a danger place for us to be. So some final thoughts about how is it that these 12 steps can be a powerful and life-changing experience for me. We've gone through the first 3. I find them all, again, incredibly important. And so I just wanted to kind of wrap this up a little bit. So working a thorough set of steps is really key, and we need to take adequate time to fully complete each one before we proceed on to the next one. Conversely, we cannot allow ourselves to stall, and so while may want to be really thorough, we also need to complete the whole 12 steps in order to achieve the full benefits of this process. The 12 steps are actually not necessarily a one and done process. So I always encourage people to be as thorough as you can, but ultimately don't paralyze yourself by expecting perfection as you go through the process. The first time you go through the 12 steps, it should bring about some really big changes in your life. But the 12 steps can also be completed as a tune-up exercise, again, at a later time to further grow and develop in our recovery. Some people read through the entire Bible once per year, and others I know complete the 12 steps again, the 12 steps as well every year, as a way of keeping them focused on their lifetime journey of recovery. So let me be real with you. Going through the process of completing the 12-step process is not actually that enjoyable. But then again, treatment rarely is. If you think of a surgery or a cancer, treatment, in a similar way, the 12 steps are made to surgically and chemically remove and destroy the effects of decades of sin and defects that have built up under the surface of our lives. Therefore, the 12 steps are not something to be completed lightly, but the healing and growth that will occur once you are done will far outweigh the pain and work involved in the process. Something that we talk about, and I really believe, is that God never wastes a hurt. And even if there are scars left over from where brokenness and sickness once existed, you can be grateful for the change that has occurred since. Having made poor choices in our lives, we can be an example to others and model how to live a changed life by God's grace through the recovery process. For me, there have been so many benefits of doing the 12 steps, the largest of which is now a lack of shame, which used to be a weight that I carried around with me every second of every day. And I didn't even actually realize it until it was gone. But this shame was crippling for me, and it would lead me to undervalue myself and to regard myself as worthless. The first time I did my step 5, which is a step that we may talk about more in the future, and I shared my inventory with an older man who is my sponsor, was a beautiful experience. He heard the worst that I had ever done. He saw the tears that flowed from my face and my repentant heart, and he encouraged me in my time of vulnerability. In the hours and days after that experience, I felt just a huge change, and a huge weight was lifted from me, and that I had realized that a weight that I've been carrying for so long was finally gone. So I guess my question to you is, what shame are you carrying right now that you may not even be fully aware of? And you can experience freedom from this too by working the 12 steps. Another benefit of completing the 12 steps is what I call authentic camaraderie. Those who have been close to me in recovery know me in ways that no one else does. The relationships that I have made with a few close men, whom I share nothing else in common with sometimes, apart from our shared addictions, are actually super rich and meaningful. So don't try and walk this recovery journey or complete the 12 steps alone, as I really feel it's dangerous and likely to be unsuccessful. As you complete the steps and get to know your sponsor, hold on to that relationship and be ready to be a sponsor for another person, a newer person in recovery, and share the gift of your presence and experience with them. Another incredible benefit of completing the 12 steps is the deepened relationship with God that you will experience. There's something so powerful about reading the names of the individuals on your amends list out loud to God and asking God to bless each one and to heal their heart of the things that we have done to them in the past. We become fully honest with God in a way that just asking him for things through prayer can never get close to. And when we truly see the filth of our depravity, but next to his goodness, purity, his grace shines brighter than any light that we have seen up until then. Just a few final thoughts here. As God affects huge change in our lives, this also enables us to be used in positive ways that we were never able to be used before. This process is exciting, but it's also scary for those of us who once regarded ourselves as useless for work in God's kingdom. For myself, I've been able to share my testimony with hundreds of people now in Canada, USA, and also in Cuba. My story is simply a recounting of how my own foolishness got me into trouble, and then how God saved me from a helpless and hopeless situation. I believe that you have a similar story to tell as well, and someone else needs to hear what your story is for their own growth and edification. So don't be shy about that, and as you gain time in recovery, be honest with kind of where you were at and where you are today. We as addicts have a responsibility to come alongside one another and provide hope and encouragement to continue to others to continue on their journey. If you're ever looking for direct support as you start or continue work on the 12 Steps to Freedom, check out on Dr. Dave Currie's YouTube channel. He posts all these talks that you're watching right now. They're all posted on a YouTube channel. And on that same YouTube channel, Dr. Dave Currie, if you click on the playlist tab, there is a section there called 12 Steps to Recovery Coaching Series, and you'll find about 13 videos in there, which I created. And the whole purpose of that is to help you, help others, provide key information about each of the 12 steps and how to best complete it. So I go through all the way from kind of people considering starting the 12 steps. It's like step 0, I think it's called. And then there's one talk for all of the 12 steps after that as well. So they're about, I think, 15 minutes each. So if you're going to do the 12 steps and if you want any help with that, please go check out the video before you start the next step and see if it's helpful for you. So in closing, I hope that you will, as Christian AA members say, pair the big book with the good book or the Bible. Use these two together to refine your heart, your behaviors, and your lifestyle. Give God access to every corner of your life and be courageous. Jump into the opportunity that the 12 steps provide, but don't do it alone and don't let yourself get stuck at any point. If you need help getting started with the 12 steps, feel free to talk to myself or anyone else who's completed the steps already. And I just want to say, God bless you as you continue surrendering to God's work in your life more day by day. Take care.